polite than I wanted it to be. Please don't take more than 5 minutes. Dr. Adil Najam, can you start us off? As a co-author of more than one IPCC report, how do you think such scientific literature is advancing public understanding of climate change? And could you also reflect on the inequality between the global north and south in terms of resources for doing science?
Thank you, Ji. Thank you very much. I hope people can hear me. So, thank you for the question, and I might surprise you with this, but one of the things with the IPCC is I think it has advanced that public understanding, and in some ways I think it has advanced it to a stage that now it is not in science's court but in policy's court. Right? So the IPCC, if people recall, was set up for a very simple thing. Here is a problem, we don't have enough science, so we will bring together a panel, and you will tell us every 5 years what the state of the science is. Now, the previous 6 reports have consistently told us that. There isn't much that they add, actually, which doesn't mean we don't need more science, but it is the policy community that hasn't been responding to it. Right? So, as we think about science and law, if you allow me to come to your question in a broader way, both science and law proclaim that they will lead to justice. Sometimes they do, but not always. But that is what is common. Both deal with facts. So I want to make a serious point here. Both science and law deal with facts. But Justice Aisha, I think they deal with facts in very different ways. That's the challenge. Law deals with facts basically to focus on, what we know. What we clearly know, that is a fact. Science is interested in facts mostly because of what we do not know. And I see a certain contradiction there. It is very dangerous if law becomes the arbiter of science, if law is going to decide that this science ye achhi hai, ye achhi nahi, right? Every time we've done that in the world or in our part of the world, it has gone to a bad place. It is bad for science to impose on law what it knows best. So what I'm trying to say is that the relationship between the two is very real, but also in some ways fraught with this dynamic. Now, let me remind you that it's not as if science in Pakistan has been missing, nor has the science law link been missing. So, 2003. I'm hoping at least one person in this place will remember there was a case. The case in 2003 was in the Lahore High Court. It was Mansoor Ali Shah versus the Federation of Pakistan. Out of that case came a smog commission led by Dr. Pervez Hassan. Right? Now, the reason I mentioned that, I don't know if this was mentioned in the previous panel, it should have been, but it really should have been. Shame on us if it didn't, but it's worth mentioning again. Out of that commission came some recommendations. They were based on science. In 2017, if I remember, December 2017, again in the Lahore High Court, there is a case, this time Waleed Iqbal versus Federation of Pakistan. At that point, the Chief Justice of the Lahore High Court is Mansoor Ali Shah. There is a commission set up. Why do I mention this? This is very important for Pakistanis. At this point, smog se bada masla koi nahi hai. theek hai? Smog mein one of the challenges is that all the action is going to be slow. Both these commissions said do these things. अच्छा ठीक बोथ इधर हाँ मैं क्लासरूम वॉइस इधर नहीं चलेगी अच्छा इस तरह बोलूँ तो ठीक है हाँ अच्छा so both these commissions, the 2003 that came up with 2007 report, had even half of them been implemented, we would today have been better off. Right now we are running after कि कल क्या हो सकता है, परसों क्या हो सकता है, and science is telling us कल कुछ नहीं हो सकता. You can only wear a mask. You cannot solve this in a week. You cannot solve this. But we had the time. We had the science. So I'll end with this very, very. I'm sorry, I've taken more than your 5. So, acha.
You have to know.
Acha. So, thank you. So, I hope this came across, but it's an important point. Right after those have been made,
किसको देना है ये चीज़?
court says
किसको
the
देना है ये?
जाओ and check the science. The science comes back. Debate that. It says कि ये चीजें करो. 4-stroke engine के तेल change करो. Start thinking about renewable energy. All the right things. The court comes in 2007 and says कि okay, please implement this. 2017 it comes back again. There is a commission. This commission again looks at the science. By this time the problem has increased. Science has
यार उनको कोई ये सेट करना यार ब्लर आ रहा है
now we are in 2024.
क्या है ब्लर आ रहा है?
7 years after
ये
that,
सेट कर सकते हैं यार
we are running after
करो यार
one day.
कोई चीज़ नहीं आई
Where the court said that right.
ये माइक तो
We
लगाना
have made your time to do the right thing. The challenge, and I want to end with this, the challenge in science and law, I think, is governance.
ये कहाँ लगाना है?
Right? Science can take you where it is. Science cannot take you. The law can look at it like
जो बोल
Google
रहे हैं जिसमें
forensic,
जी
along with
जरूरी है
other
अदरवाइज
evidences
लाइव
of
स्ट्रीमिंग में
fact,
आवाज़
and push on governance. Now, the governance problem, if I want to end with this, the governance problem is that the solution to bad governance is not more governance. This is a मैं मुस्कुरा के एक वजह से कह रहा हूँ. The solution to bad governance is not more governance. The solution to bad governance is better governance. तो एक प्रॉब्लम हुआ, उसका जवाब में एक और इदारा बना देने से काम नहीं होगा, because you will just keep proliferating these things, right? So, to me, the role of law is helping society listen to the science and translate it to policy, but most importantly then to be the custodian of policy कि जी आपने ये करना था, किया या नहीं किया, right? So law is not in a position to decide what best science is, but it is in a position to decide whether what we have agreed to do in policy is being done or not, whether that policy is international commitments are we fulfilling or not, national, you made a commission, you said you will implement this, at least let us know where it is. So sorry for being all over, but my point here is that unless we add the governance or policy angle to law and science, it will remain incomplete, because that is where the loophole is, not only in Pakistan. This is, I don't want to single out Pakistan. It's building me, the challenge right now is exactly the governance challenge. There are treaties. This is the 29th COP. That's a statement of failure. For 29 years, we keep coming every year. We keep saying the same thing. The challenge is that the things we agree to, we are unable to implement. Right? That, I think, is where the most important fulcrum of law is. I've taken too long, but I'll take only half a sentence and then I promise to shut up. The part of the challenge for someone on the Supreme Court justice is that a lot of the governance problems are at the local level. And your authority is there, but jurisdiction is not there. जब पाकिस्तान में flood आता है and that building flows away with the flood, that is because someone was not following the building code. It's not just that flood was bad. Those pictures that we all had sympathy for, the thing was that there was a code, the code was not followed, and that to me is the governance thing. So sorry I didn't come to the north-south, but I hope it helps.
Loss and damage has emerged as a third pillar alongside mitigation and adaptation, underscoring the need for accountability and support in reversible climate events. You outline the path to the decision to establish a loss and damage fund and explain to us how attribution science has strengthened scientific basis for addressing loss and damage in countries experiencing irreversible climate events.
Thank you very much, Myra, and thanks for having me. So, before coming to your question, so in response to what Dr. Adil has said, and broadly I totally agree with him, but I have I'll put things in a different context, and I'll try to highlight, taking you on the ride of in past, that what is the contribution of science in our understanding. of the process which we are hearing in under this, COP 29. So IPCC, so first study which actually set in stone that the emissions we are doing at that time, we were doing, that may lead to irreversible impacts. That came out in 1960, where they also talked about the failure of West Antarctic ice sheet, which will lead to the sea level rise and all the calamity which most of which we are facing at the moment. So that was in 1960. It took almost 30 years for the establishment of IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in 1988. And then the first report of the IPCC, it came out in 1990, first assessment report, which led to the creation or the establishment of UNFCCC. So the very, existence of or the creation of UNFCCC may be attributed to, it can be attributed to IPCC, the science. And now coming to your question again, that the first, the big agreement, which was like called Kyoto Protocol, which came out in 1997. If you look at if you read the Kyoto Protocol, that was mainly addressing the mitigation, because UNFCCC was created with an understanding that it is the emissions which we have to tackle, because as a humanity, as a single race, we have to address the emissions. So 1997, it was like mainly for all the CBDR, the Common But Differentiated Responsibility, that was a part of the convention itself, and it was also reflected in 1997 Kyoto Protocol. But still, around the turn of the century and the first decade of 21st century, now the developing countries start to have the understanding of how important it is to reflect the adaptation into this process. And then if you look at the decisions which came out, those are mainly focused on adaptation afterwards in the first half of the 21st century. And that is aided by the science which were produced by IPCC. So with an understanding of we need adaptation, the concept of limits to adaptation and all that led to the and aided to the decision making. And in 2009, then it was realized we need adaptation. Because why do we need adaptation? Because you made UNFCCC for mitigation. It's not happening. We are suffering. We are going to adapt to that. And then we need resources. You are responsible. You have historical responsibility. You have to give us money. So in 2009, we have a decision on climate finance. And with more understanding, so the thing was that then people started to say that look, you haven't stopped emission, and now the temperature have gone up to the level which is already impacting us. So adaptation is the forward looking. Adaptation is building, let's say, dam. It's like a nature-based solution which takes time, to implement. So it was thought that the temperature which we are facing at the moment, let's say it was like 0.9 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial level, and that is on the global scale and at the annual level. So 0.9 degrees centigrade doesn't mean that it's 0.9 everywhere. At one place it can be like 5 degrees higher for a limited period of time. So then the loss and damage, people started about loss and damage, and 2015, the new Paris Agreement, then we have the mentioning of loss and damage into the process. And now the issue with loss and damage is that even before the industrial revolution, when people haven't started, or the countries haven't started emitting fossil fuel emissions, we used to have these extreme events. We used to have floods, we used to have drought, but those were because of natural variation in the system, what we call as natural variability. So the question came up that what is the evidence that if a particular event happened in Pakistan, you may relate it to, you may hold us responsible. So that is the take from the developed countries. So you have to prove that the flood you have faced or the drought you have faced, that is because the emission which we have done is not the part of natural variability of the climate system. So that is the big question, and science has a limitation to answer that particular question, but that is what we have at our hands. And in the literature, in the recent scientific literature, that question is being addressed. So Myra was just showing me that I don't have a time, but perhaps I will get another chance. So I'll try to expand more on this, on the usage of science and data to respond to such questions.
That's actually a perfect segue into the second round. Dr. Abid, how would you characterize the state of climate science in Pakistan? What are predominant sources of knowledge, of information, study and analysis? Are public institutions doing the work? Private sector doing its share? More generally, could you provide a sense of the science and policy?
Thank you very much. I'd like to just throw some pieces of jigsaw puzzle and I'll let audience complete the picture. First thing first, when we're talking of science, climate science, my argument is that it's not only science that determines our climate change response, it is arts and it is our societal values too. So and it's not either or, it's and. So while scientific data is extremely important, then comes whether I'm growing wheat or cotton or sugarcane or rice, then comes whether I prefer to ride on a car or I'll be using my bicycle and all other. So climate change policy and climate change laws, much of it what is discussed in those policies, those are beyond the mandate of Ministry of Climate Change and that policy. We are talking of food security, we are talking of energy, we are talking of urbanization, we are talking of transportation, we are talking of water usage, forest, and for all these things, of course, the source of information is not only a science, it's more than one. Now, coming at the state of this climate science, I have to say with pain that our public sector universities and public, they somehow are living in a state of self-imposed censorship. So they only producing theses, but which are not the applied sciences, which are not the applied research. So they are conducting research for the sake of research. Our public sector research institutes, they are haunted by lack of funding. So all they are provided is just their space and salaries and brick and mortar, very little for R&D. And our private sector only takes a lead when it pinches them. So now I'm quite optimistic that with this carbon border adjustment mechanism, which I have been opposing the linkage of trade and environment throughout my life, but now as EU would start imposing carbon tax, our private sector, they would immediately now work on how to reduce their carbon emission level, because it is pinching their profit and it would be eroding their competitiveness. And my final point on this, in the age of artificial intelligence and the generative intelligence, I think we need to ask ourselves the fundamental question. Throughout we were told that don't look who is saying, just listen what is being said. I think now with this artificial intelligence, we need to perhaps redo this question to find out that not only what is being said, but who is saying, because it would challenge the credibility of scientific literature, it would challenge the credibility of many evidences. And we have been seeing it not only in Pakistan, but at macro level, where even the sanctity of election in US was at one point of time was under question. So this is some of my initial thoughts on this first round, and I'll be happy to come on back on second round.
Justice Aisha Malik, can I now... Achha, so I have to hold them together. Sorry everyone, and thank you for your patience. How is climate science being integrated into judicial decision making? Can you walk us through your experiences and assessments? In particular, for example, what role have expert witnesses played in helping the judiciary understand complex scientific data?
So, thank you, Myra. I'm surrounded by 3 doctors. I was paying attention to the title. So 3 scientifically very strong people with me. But let me tell you how your work is so important in the courts. Climate science has been there since the beginning of climate litigation. Without the science, there can be no climate litigation. And as Dr. Adil very aptly put it, it was used to establish the fact that the loss, the harm, the damage caused is because of climate change. It's because there is something called climate change. So we have been using, particularly in Pakistan, climate science to fortify the fact and to evidence the fact that this is because of climate change, that climate change is important and that we have to respond to climate change. But this is not how we're going to use science in the future. For now, we have relied on a lot of data, which is basically data procured about the rain or about drought or about heat. But I think what we need to go towards is publications and academic thinking, because that's very important. What are the experts saying? What are they thinking? And we have used expert testimony, but relying mainly on agency work to see what are the relevant agencies saying, what's the data that they have, and how are they looking at the matter. So most of our experts are from the Environment Protection Agency, from people working on climate sciences, these eminent doctors sitting with me. These are the experts who have played a role in the cases and have come and helped the court understand why this must be linked to climate change. So I'm reminded of a case on the floods in Sindh, and how, let me say, it was difficult for us to get the data. How difficult it was for us to get data to let us know the extent of the loss. And then if you want to divide the loss and you want to look at it, closer, where all was the loss? Who suffered the loss? For me, it's important to understand gender and climate change. So where is the loss and how did the floods affect women and children, people with special abilities? That data is just not that easily available. So data is something, as has been said, it's not a secret. Let's put it out there. Let everybody look at the science. And we need to work on the science, because looking at litigation tomorrow, science will play a very important role. Without the science, it's going to be everywhere. Because I can see now that in Pakistan, it's going to be about the money. And people over there are not going to look at what's happening here at COP29, loss and damage fund, whether there is money or not. They're just going to say, listen, I set up my business and it just eroded with the flood. And that's not my fault. That's bad decision making. So someone has to compensate me. And then that's where the courts will play a role. So if we don't have the science, the judge sitting there is going to say, all right, so this is a case of damages, and I think the government should pay this amount of damage for the loss done. Now that's not climate science. Climate science will say that this flood was related to climate change. It will say to what extent can the damage and the loss be attributed to climate change, and whether the government is responsible. So it will look at risk. It will look at whether it was planned for, whether all the necessary contingencies were made. And without looking at all of that, you can't just slap damages and ask the government or any relevant stakeholder to pay anything, because that would not be backed by any proper evidence, as I would look at it. So science is very important, and that brings me to the point that judges have to become a part of this conversation. We can't keep them out of the conversation, because if judges don't understand the science and judges don't understand the need of science, they won't be able to use the science in their courtrooms. And so we have to play a role in understanding the science. We have to play a role in realizing the relevance of that science in the cases. The other type of cases that are likely to come to the courts in Pakistan are in the constitutional courts, which are adaptation loss damage cases, where people come to ask for money or come to say that government needs to pay more money in these areas or invest in these areas, or even compensate them because the conditions like the smog or heat, it could be glacial loss, glacial melt at the moment, that these things are affecting their livelihood, their right to life. And that's when the relevant stakeholder, the regulator, will be called to court to say, all right, what are you doing? So the court will need to look at the science. What is the data? And just looking at numbers is not enough. I again emphasize research and publications. What are the experts saying? What is the relevance of this information that's before me? That becomes very relevant. And that will be the basis of the new judges' judicial decision making.
We're done with the first round of questions. Yay! And I think we're doing pretty good on time. So now we begin the second round of questions. Dr. Adil Najam, your first response is really helpful, but it's also problematic for me because you basically answered my second question. So I've had to come up with a second question based on what you said. And so I actually want to extend the line of inquiry in your first response. And I want to invite you to reflect on this further with us. If we identify the gap as one of governance, if we recognize that the problem is a governance problem, then I want us to ask whose problem the governance problem is. If this is such a well-known and chronic phenomenon, then doesn't the governance problem also become a science and law problem? Shouldn't science and law then be responding to how governance happens? Any thoughts at all would be very welcome.
Do I have enough to act? That is my IPCC question. We have enough, not because of lack of science. I'll end this with coming to your question in again a roundabout way on building on what Fahad rightly said, right? So for the Pakistanis here, I'll try to make it Pakistani, if you will. There was mitigation, then there came adaptation, then, as he pointed out, came loss and damage. Now, is that a triumph of science, or is it a failure of policy? I was working on it when there was only mitigation, and we thought कि यार हम mitigation को साफ कर देंगे, adaptation की ज़रूरत ही नहीं पड़ेगी, right? We will solve the problem before that. So mitigation essentially is you have a problem. What do you do from keeping the problem to happen? The failure of mitigation is called adaptation. The failure of mitigation is adaptation. If you fail to keep the problem from happening, you will have to take mitigation steps. The legal questions in mitigation are attribution. If you fail to do it, you will have to adapt. Now the legal question in adaptation is distribution of responsibility. कि आपने प्राडो वाले को पहले रोकना है या आपने फ्यूल वुड वाली को पहले रोकना है, right? The failure of adaptation, I would argue, is what's called loss and damage. In a way, if I don't want to live in a place जहाँ बारिश नहीं है, right? So mitigation is I move to a place जहाँ बारिश नहीं. अगर बारिश शुरू हो गई, adaptation is I get an umbrella. If the umbrella breaks, that's loss and damage. Or if I don't have an umbrella, that's loss and damage. So loss and damage in particular, you are exactly right, is going to raise a lot of questions. But my addition to that is that that's where the governance comes in. Right? Loss and damage is not simply a science issue. So yes, it's a science issue, but it is a governance and responsibility issue, right? And that's why I think the courts will have to intervene to ask the question. A science question is, do we have enough knowledge to attribute कि ये flood जो है, you know, Fahad will be able to tell you at some point कि 30% of the flood is because of climate. Okay, मैं मोटी science कर रहा हूँ. But now the question is, if you have limited resources, how are you going to cut that baby? That's the legal question. That's the policy question. So I think there is science. Yeah, I think there is science. I think I'm wrapping up with your north-south question also. I think there is an imbalance in science. The north has far more resources. Even जो मेरे जैसे या आपके जैसे हैं, हम भी नॉर्थ में जाके बैठ जाते हैं. We start sort of talking that language. Part of it is our responsibility to remain sort of true to, you know, our surroundings and bringing that science there. But I will not undermine the science in the country itself, whether it is science happening at STPI, whether it is public service science. In a way, one of the things, and I end with this, one of the things that is happening in climate change is very fast changing from a global issue to not just a global issue but a local issue. As long as you're talking mitigation, you are essentially global. Molecule is a molecule is a molecule. Adaptation and loss and damage happens not globally, it has to happen in a place. There is a gaon, there is a person, there is a house, it is local, right? So you will need, Justice Aisha, science that is local, right? And that means A, pushing the policy walas कि यार at least do. मेरी तरफ से तो if you can just make them follow the policy that is there, the building codes. If we only follow the building codes as they exist in Karachi, Lahore and Swat, a whole bunch of problems will end up. Lekin that's not going to come to the Supreme Court. That's going to be at some district wala or some departmental judicial thing. So I fully take a science has to see, judges have to be involved, but I would also add judicial officials at every level have to be. The guy who comes and gives me my permit that your house is okay, that's where that science also needs to come, because either that window is right or not. मैंने जवाब अभी भी नहीं दिया ना.
With your response, with your earlier response, you were on the cusp of telling us what weather attribution studies are, how they're done. Can you explain what this work entails, what prompts such studies, what challenges there might be, and where you see this work headed? And of course, I ask this of you because your work has contributed to recent, very important studies of weather attribution. So if you could help us out.
Acha, it's such a interesting discussion. So I'm thinking that it deserves more than 1 hour probably, but we have certain limitations. But like what Dr. Adil Najam was saying, it reminded me of a poetic lines in Urdu poetry के वो कहते हैं कि झूठ बोला है तो कायम भी रहो इस पर ज़फ़र आदमी को साहिब किरदार होना चाहिए. That is in relation to the promises of the developed countries to curb emissions, and they haven't delivered on that front. So and coming to your questions now, so yeah, we have been involved in the studies of climate change attribution, and to go before going into the details of it, so let me tell you that the laws in the Europe, those are pretty much set in stone, and the litigation cases, they require this kind of study. And the interesting aspect is that we sitting in Islamabad, we have been approached by a law firm because they wanted to sue the businesses in Germany and France, and they asked us to do attribution study for 2022 case, 22 floods in Pakistan. So how we do studies, and in the process of UNFCCC and in this loss and damage domain, we are having these kind of questions from scientific on scientific front. So one question is that, for example, in developed countries, you have data sets, observed data sets, which goes as long as 150 years or more something. So when you have to, insert statistics on that data sets, you have a sufficient amount of data set, a meteorological station where you can apply the statistics, you can see the trend, you can do the analysis, you can tell that, okay, the trend shows that this particular event, that is that is because of the climate change. So that does not follow the previous pattern. So that is one thing. But in other countries like Africa, if you look at the map of the observation, you can see Africa empty in those maps because they simply do not have observations. Same applies in Pakistan. Northern areas of Pakistan, the density of the meteorological stations are very less as compared to what it should have been. The second point is the tools we use for the case of attribution are the climate models. Climate models are very expensive model. Those have been developed over the period of last 50 years. I did my PhD in climate modeling, so I know that those run on supercomputers, needs investment over the period of 50 years of hundreds of millions, if not billions. And if you, there are almost 30 global climate models which are existing at the moment, and 90 to 95% of them are developed in the global north. So only you have like 1 or 2 models which are developed in China. So whenever they are developing a model, if it is being developed with the taxpayer monies of, let's say, US, so they will focus that the model should have performed well over the US, over the North American continent. They probably won't care about how it is performing over South Asia or over Pakistan. So we also have these limitations. So I have just pointed out, in the interest of time, just 2 limitations: the length of the observational record and the application of climate models over a region. But the discussions are already happening. You are already having peer-reviewed scientific literature. I've been a part of a paper which came out recently, which says that it should not be a limiting factor. If you're not able to do a attribution study for a certain case, it should not be a limiting factor, because the broader science, the qualitative science, it tells you, IPCC tells you, it has been telling you for the last 30 years that climate change is happening, and it will lead to extreme event. It will lead to extreme flooding in Pakistan. So you do not have to attribute, like to go into a high-tech attribution studies for Pakistan. That is a starting point, and that is not only like suggestion coming from me. It is in the literature, in the context of loss and damage, loss and damage fund. So scientists have started discussing about it. The negotiation haven't reached to a point where they are in a position to make us to make a decision. But scientifically, there are already voices which say that it should not be a limiting factor in order to fund a developing country in response to loss and damage. So I have been a part of few studies. So for example, this 2022 floods. So that was led by Imperial College London. It a part of that study from Pakistan, and that study showed that climate change exacerbated that particular flooding. In the absence of climate change and the absence of emission, if we go through to the pre-industrial level, that flood would have happened, but with very less intensity. 2022 heat wave in Pakistan and India, that climate change made it 30 times more likely. Then we had flooding in northern Pakistan, northwestern KPK province in Pakistan and adjoining Afghanistan in the winter season. That is also attributed to flooding, but climate model did not show, because there was a limitation with the climate model, but still we were able to make qualitative assessments, and I think that assessment would be very useful for the litigation purposes. But those statements, the qualitative statements, should not come from thin air, has to be embedded in science. Sorry?
For that, Dr. Saleri, can I ask you? So you have, and given also that many of you have mentioned the smog question, and you are somebody who's written extensively on the air pollution disaster. For those of you who are not aware, there is a major air pollution disaster in major cities in Pakistan currently. We have the worst, highest recorded air pollution levels anywhere in the world. So in a recent piece, Dr. Saleri, you posited that the solution lies at, I quote, the interface of science, policy and finance. Given the urgency of what is now an acute public health issue, can you spell this interface out for us? Thank you.
Thank you. So let me explain this sentence. So of course, science leads us to the policies which are required, and as Adil reminded us that it is there since 2003. So we know there's a smog, and we know the evidences that why this smog is becoming a problematic issue. Now comes with every policy, and if I bring this lack of implementation on policy to any legal court of law, I think a court needs to look at 4 essential things. So the first and important thing is institutional arrangement, whether that policy, who is the institution that is responsible for getting that policy implemented, and with what mandate. The second important thing is finances for it. So it's not only that finances are required to conduct these scientific studies and to come up with the evidences, but also to implement the policy. So the second thing is, after institutional arrangement, is the financial allocation, financial releases. The third important and interesting prerequisite in it is HR, human resources. So whether that institution where the money is parked, whether it is equipped with the right skill sets, the right human resources, and the fourth one is use of technology. So, and I'll ask the question that whether EPA in Islamabad, which is responsible for taking care of vehicular emission in Islamabad, how many mobile laboratories it has, whether it has right set of technology at all or not. So these are the 4 things, and it's all a political economy question. And the political economy, it defines governance in a very different manner. So it is asking and questioning ourselves that how the decisions are being taken, on the basis of which evidences, how those evidences are being generated and produced, how the contested these claims on resources, they are actually being tackled, and who is responsible for taking what decision. And these are the questions which again takes us back to science and to the studies, so that we can actually not only confine ourselves to hardcore laboratory data, but also to the social sciences. And these two, as I said, it's not either or question, it's and question. As they say that the more I know, the more I realize that I know nothing. So we need to think of this whole smog question, and smog, why it became extremely important. It was not only about Lahore being or Multan being the most polluted city. It is also due to all those financial losses that one is occurring to. Either it is the mobility constraint, or it is the closure of schools, or it's the closure of businesses, or it's the health losses, and all other. And as I said in the first round, the moment anything it gets a monetized value, it all of a sudden it becomes important. The heat wave in Karachi, it only became important when it became a headline in the newspapers. X number of precious lives were lost to heat wave in Karachi. Tharparkar, it only becomes an issue when we say that why number of children they are suffering with pneumonia during winter. And similarly, no one talks of smog and the air pollution throughout the year. The air pollution and these particular matters, they are suspended and they are present in the air that we breathe, even in summertime and even in monsoon. But in winter, when due to various other phenomena, it becomes a financial issue that is highlighted, and that's where we try to then recoup the whole year of pollution, try to mitigate it in 2 months. And I think that approach needs to be taken care of, and the response to it is more science, more data, and not only the hardcore science but also social sciences and the way of living.
Thank you so much for that. Justice Aisha Malik, you delineated some ways in which the court uses expertise from other domains such as science in your earlier response. And I'm wondering, and I'm hoping that you can extend that line of inquiry and tell us if and how you see this role changing. How do you consider that these collaborative forms need to be strengthened? And then part 2 of my prompt is, what do you think of fear is down the road if this translation doesn't happen, and if these collaborations and conversations don't take place, or if they falter further? And as you conclude your comments, I would also invite you as the panel chair to share your reflections on the collective discussion to help us wrap up the panel. Also, congratulations everyone, you've done really well on time.
I'm asking everyone to do before me, and then I can. So, I think what we've learned from the experts is that everyone's working on improving the science, not just numerical science, but social sciences, which in my world translates to publications and academic work, which is really what the experts are saying, because I'm not the expert. I rely on the expert. I need to know what the experts are saying, and accredited experts, those whose opinion is valued in their world. Those are the experts whose opinions need to be seen and need to come into the courtrooms. So I think it's important to understand the relevance of science in the courtroom. Apart from the fact that it's establishing the fact and evidencing climate change, the harm, the loss, the damage, it's also creating inroads to accountability. It's also making people responsible. It's allowing the court to understand where to place the burden and to whom to make responsible. And as Dr. Adil said, it helps enforcement. And I think enforcement is really critical. Enforcement is where we should be focusing because we need to enforce decisions that are taken in the courtrooms. We need to enforce plans and policies that are made, and we need to understand that without enforcement we can't just keep planning and packing up and sort of loading up on science or even data, because it's not helping if we're not enforcing. So courts help in creating accountability, in enforcement, and they help in also placing that positive duty on people, on institutions, which is important as well. At the same time, there are difficulties. The biggest challenge for judges is the science itself. Understanding the science, understanding the relevance of science. Some of the more advanced jurisdictions in the world now are actually reviewing the quality of the science. So they've gone beyond just relying on science. They now look at the quality of the science and say, well, we don't think this is enough information, or this is the right information. We need another view. We need some other concept over here. So that's where we are going with the science. If we don't have science, for me, it's a total collapse. Without the data, without the science, without the opinion of the experts, there is no way that a court can adjudicate on climate science. As we heard in the morning, we are beyond the stage now of declaring the rights. We know what the rights are. We know that it's a human right issue. We know the urgency of the matter. And more importantly, we know that we have to act on the matter. The question now is, what should we do and how do we attribute the responsibilities to the different people who are responsible? In Pakistan, this is vital, this is critical, because unfortunately people do shy away from their responsibilities, but a lot of the time people don't know what their responsibility is. Climate change is one of those areas. For the common man on the road, it's not climate change, it's just something that has happened because of a force that was bigger than him. And he has no control over it. So he has to go to someone who has the money. For the man on the street, COP29 is irrelevant. They just want money because they have to rebuild their life. So they need money. So they are going to come to court looking for that money. For the judge, the challenge is, where do I get the money from? How much money am I going to attribute over here? And what's the basis of this? There has to be evidence for it. That's the science. And unless we're not creating this science, if we're not moving in that direction, we're not going to be able to help the process of allowing people to access justice, of allowing people to improve their lives, and in Pakistan's context, I would say, of allowing people to survive. Because we are aware of the heat problem, we are aware of the rain problem, we are aware of glacial melt. These are all big problems. And if we're not dealing with these in a scientific way, then what will happen is that judges will rely on the general norms that they understand of awarding damages. And for the government, that's going to be a nightmare, because there will be no proportion to what is awarded and the reasons for it. It will just be, all right, they've lost their business, pay them X amount of money. Now, whether that's a fair amount, whether that's a just amount, and whether that amount really is attributed to climate change becomes relevant. So I think that's vital and that's critical for all of us to understand. And I again stress on the work of the academics, I stress on the work of publication. I think we need to engage in this dialogue. The science has to come into the courtroom, but the courtroom also has to understand what's going on. And numbers is not my thing. I need to understand and conceptualize those numbers. What does that data mean? And I'll ask what the expert is saying. The expert who is looked at in the world as an expert. So what are they saying? How should I look at these things? What are the different ways of using science? So that's where publication becomes important. Reports are also important. It's another source of science, so you do look at reports. But reports from the court's point of view generally, or sometimes are officious papers. They're official views of how things are churning out. So I think it's important that we look at inwards at our academic world, at our science people, and say, please start writing. And writing doesn't always have to be research papers in today's world. In this digital world, opinions also matter. And judges do look at opinions, do read opinions. So I had to look at the work of these three doctors to understand what they're saying in their world of science. It is important. Yes, both. I did 4 of them. Sorry, my apologies. So I think before you ask me to wrap up, I'd like for each of our guests to sort of say what they envision is the future of science in their world, and then I can just close it. So Dr. Adil, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Ji. Thank you. I hope people can hear. I totally agree. I totally agree, and Justice Aisha is very kind that science needs to come to the courtroom. I think you're exactly right that science, the court needs science. 4 days ago, the International Court of Justice published the list of parties it is calling to testify in the climate change responsibility case. I think Pakistan is one of them, right? You will be doing them more and more. I think the flip is also true. This is an important thing. Science needs the courts. I think science is finding its limits. हमने बता दिया ना कि climate change हो रही है. IPCC 1, IPCC 2, IPCC 3, IPCC 4 वही गाल बारी हर साल करते रहते हैं. At some point, I think even policy will have to push to the courts, in national as well as international. And I will end by saying that let me suggest something that the courts can do to help science in Pakistan. I'm still repenting not answering your question. Engage local science. रावी के बारे में आपको आदिल नजम बॉस्टन में बैठ के नहीं बता सकता. रावी के बारे में that guy who's going to tell you is someone who not only knows the Ravi but feels the Ravi. Lahore pollution, the reason I think this is a success story, young science motivated people simply took the science in their own hands and have pushed the government to start pushing those numbers. And the reason was it was becoming difficult for them to breathe. We have these two problems. लेकिन अगर हम smog को लें, would Lahore look different tonight if we had more science? I don't think so. Science told you exactly what it was. Science was there. Would Lahore look different if law hadn't acted? I don't think so. The law said, ek commission, dusra commission, the commission said, do this. So I think that confluence of what Abid is also talking about, of science needs law, law needs science, and I think good governance needs good science and good law happening together.
That is very well said, and I'll just extend the point which Dr. Adil has made that, and also Dr. Abid alluded to it, that there is a disconnect in Pakistan between the universities, between the academia and the policy making. We need to fill that gap. I mean, because I happen to work with some of the students in the university, and the students struggle to find the research problem. For example, master student, they struggle to find the research problem. And when you go to the ministry, they have a lot of problems. They are suffering from the lack of expertise, lack of workforce. So I think filling up this gap would be beneficial for not only for the policy makers but also for the academia. So I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think this panel and all the panels before, it's very clear climate change is a multidimensional issue. No single sector, no single government entity, private sector, single country can handle it. And likewise, when we talk of its possible solution, again, it's the multi-sectoral arrangement of knowledge which is required. And I'll re-emphasize that in this artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence, we need to learn the art of knowledge management. When I was a student, it's all about searching for the knowledge, searching for data. Now, data is there is overabundance of data, and now how to actually manage that data and how to translate it in a without losing its complexity and without oversimplifying it in a manner where the judiciary and the policy makers and legislators, they can actually make use of it. That is our challenge, and this is what our work should be focused upon, apart from generating data and managing these sciences. So from Pakistan's perspective, I would say that at STPI we try to actually bridge this gap between evidences with policy makers, legislators and judiciary, and we are very thankful that you keep on supporting the good work that different Pakistani institutions are doing. That is a right way to go.
Humanities. So, some of us feel like we're not quite sure what camp we fit in. But one way that I have, in my own research in Pakistan, and I've basically worked with the irrigation bureaucracy, one way that I see a lot of this coming together is through the question of expertise. That there are various forms and kinds of knowledge that are being produced, but only some are recognized as expert knowledges. And I think here it's important to recognize, like all of you are pointing out, science has had that status. It automatically attracts expertise. So for example, an anthropologist like me is very used to hearing people say, आप तो कहानियाँ सुनाती हैं, anthropologists तो कहानी सुनाते हैं. And of course हम कहानियाँ सुनाते हैं, but it's really interesting. I think you've all led to this view where, you know, you also can say science भी कहानी सुना रही है. Science is, you know, and so again, just to stress, just to reinforce what all three of you have said. That I think what you're urging us to do is to think of an expanded view of science as one that, you know, science which requires qualitative science, like you're also saying, it requires or is limited in a particular conception. So this is an embedded or contextual view of science. That's my takeaway. Having said that, though, I would also say that my takeaway as an academic is, of course, going to be very different, because my compulsions are very different from, say, a justice of the Supreme Court, right? Like, I have the luxury of formulating some takeaways that you, for example, as you are dealing with cases, do not have. And so I'm also very curious to hear what your takeaways are.
So I'd like to thank everyone for the great insight that we've had. My takeaways are, I think my first takeaway is that moving forward, climate litigation now is not just that one person's story. And by the way, judges also tell stories. Judgments are stories. It's the story of that person who's come to court. And in this case, it will be the story of that person who's come to court and climate change. How climate change has totally changed their life and how it's affected their rights and their ability to lead a good life. So in that storytelling and in that, I have a new actor now in the courtroom, and that is climate science. I think as Pakistan, as Pakistanis, we need to stress and prioritize science. We need to talk about the relevance of pushing our youth towards understanding that we need to talk from knowledge. We need to talk from information. We need to prioritize this matter. So I take what you said. I think that's very important, that there are always students always looking for subjects to talk about. And here's this huge big subject that's right out there. So I don't think we should just place the blame on the universities and all. I think as people, as Pakistanis, we have to engage with issues. We have to understand what our issues are. And let's not just keep dragging the old issues again and beating the same story again and again. Let's look at it. You have a whole digital world out there. Everybody's on the internet. You all know what's going on. So I think we have to engage. And in this case, we have to engage with climate change. We have to engage with this discussion at every level, and we have to bring the discussion down to that man who doesn't understand climate change. So that's the story that all of you are going to tell. That's the story that I will have to translate. The second part, I think that's important, is collaboration. I think the idea of everyone working in silos has finished, including the judiciary. We all have to collaborate because climate change is our problem. It's not a my problem, it's an our problem. And if we're not all collaborating and talking, then the science is also evolving in silos. It's not going to help anybody. So it's important for them to know what I want and what I need to understand, as much as it's important for me to know what they are looking for and why they are looking for it. So we all have to start talking, and we have to see this collaborative effect. And most important, I think that is again what I stress on, that and what Dr. Adil has stressed on, is enforcement. Let's move our focus from let's do this now, let's do that now, to what we can do with what we have, enforcement. Because in better enforcement is better accountability and it's greater efficiency. And that's what we need. We need better enforcement. And my starting point is, well, you have all these judgments to start enforcing. If you just start thinking about how to enforce those judgments, how to use those commission reports, those committees, if you start then taking that message forward, that's where the difference starts. That's where the difference is made. And I think it's important to understand that, again, the idea that courtrooms are just there to burden people, that's not what courtrooms do. They look for solutions, particularly this new way of thinking. Climate change has taught judges that you have to be solution oriented. You can't just pass a judgment, and just say this is what needs to be done. You have to look at what can be practically done. And for Pakistan, this is a big challenge. So I think all of us in our way should consider ourselves to be scientists, and we should all think about what we can do to protect our environment. Okay. So thank you, Myra, and thank you all of you.
Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the audience. Thank you for your time.
Group photo है.
There's a group photo now.
Sorry, you were saying. I thought I didn't realize that an announcement.
Sir, जरा
ग्रुप फोटो सर एक
हाँ बाकी भी यही भिजवानी है सब बाकी भी भिजवाने हैं थोड़ा
किसने लिखा है? मैंने लिखवाया.
मैंने आपको भेजा
होनी है मैम अभी होगी अभी